Hello and welcome to What Would Jesus Tech? My name is Andrew Noble. Today we're going to be talking about the election. It just happened for us just a couple days ago. For you, it might have been a week ago. But we're trying to make sense out of it, both as Christians and as well as people who are interested in technology. And some would say that the next 4 years are going to be the most pivotal years for our technological future, that the amount of changes that are coming are going to so drastically affect human life. And why not talk about the US election, where those policies do impact the globe quite readily? So Joel, Austin, it's kind of fun to have an American on the pod, me and Joel from the Canadian perspective. But how would you guys go through your stories of before the vote, seeing the election night, and then after? Like, how would you contextualize it for listeners?
I'm curious to hear Joel's perspective. Being the other Canadian, I want to hear what he thinks.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the perspective I'm coming from is as a Canadian and also someone in the tech community looking at like the accelerationist with AI and like open source AI and all of those like narratives, and like Lena Khan with FTC and the regulation and those type of narratives.
What's Lena Khan? Sorry.
She's the commissioner
Lena Khan,
of the
she's
FTC
the
chair.
Yeah, she's
FTC chair.
She's the head of the Federal Trade Commission. She has been leading the charge at kind of reversing a lot of the consolidation that's been happening in the big tech space, and moves to make the tech space more competitive, and like combating just a lot of really bad anti-competitive practices, which, I mean, she's unpopular in the business world for that, even though some of her results I think are very good and very, very important.
Yeah.
And so Trump, she's on the Trump side.
No, she's on the Harris side. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, even like that perspective, definitely me and Austin probably have like the two sides to the coin, where I'm looking at it as she blocked a lot of M&A, like we can get into more, but like JetBlue and Spirit Airlines, and then that couldn't go through. And then one of them basically is withering away, and then they couldn't compete with like the bigger airlines. So there are like definitely like, it's a very interesting perspective in the tech world, right? Because it's like, okay, is blocking M&A good or bad, right?
Right.
So all of those undertones, I think, for me, and like seeing also the social media split, that was interesting, or just a media split in general, where social media was definitely more like, hey, like Trump is winning, whatever, and then legacy media was like, oh, like Harris is winning, it's very close. So you're getting these like two different signals, and yeah, all of this is kind of like looking at it after the election is a referendum on like, yeah, podcasts do make a difference. Harris didn't go on a lot of podcasts, right? Trump went on like so many, like Rogan, he did 3 hours. People got to know him personally, like all of those things. So I think there's a lot to learn, really.
Yeah.
Going in, I was like, I was thinking it's going to be a nail biter, and then as it became more clear that like this is really shifting one way hard in like, you know, House, Senate, and the presidential candidate, it was like, oh, okay, this is what the majority popular vote even think is best for the country. So
yeah, from one American voter perspective, I mean, I was not going to be happy with this election outcome either way. I am someone who thought that both Trump and Harris were blights of candidates for their own unique set of reasons. I put Joe Biden's inability to concede, or not concede, but inability to
step down,
step down. Whether he stepped down or whether he just announced he wasn't going to run again, two different routes there. But because he didn't do that early enough to give the Democratic Party a chance to put forward a proper candidate and a proper process, that's why Trump won. I mean, that is ultimately like the thing that prevented the Democrats from putting forth any type of meaningful rival choice. They threw together something at the last minute with one of the most unpopular candidates, even among their own party. I mean, people don't realize just how poorly received a candidate Kamala Harris was even in 2020, she was at the bottom of the rank in terms of popularity, even among Democrats. So on election day, I was not going to be happy either way. I thought this whole election was just very sad and disappointing. And I knew that Trump, or I suspected that Trump was probably going to win. It was just a question of how much. And I will say that I was very much surprised at how much. I mean, I think we're still coming to terms with just how seismic this election is in terms of the shifting demographics that went into this, that Trump gained a very diverse multicultural shift in his direction. The only two polling groups that did not move more toward the right were, I believe it was women in their 30s, and weirdly enough, the
single
plus
women.
60, single women in their 30s, and the plus 65 crowd. That last one's a little weird, but it's hard to overstate just how wrong or out of touch traditional media was at predicting just how seismic of a red wave was coming, which is funny because in 2022 that was what they were all focused on. They were all focused on this impending red tsunami, as they called it, and that red tsunami just never materialized. And here they have the opposite problem where they're underplaying the red the red wave that's coming. They think that it's going to be this really close nail biter, and no, 24 hours later, it's not just decided, it's like comfortably decided. Like there's nothing up for debate, that this is over and Trump won even stronger than he did in 2016.
I do think I've seen different people arguing about why did Trump win? Like what are those key factors? Obviously it's multiple factors. You've just raised one in terms of, well, look who he was up against and look at the process for that. I do think that there's a trend, Derek Thompson has reported on this, that incumbent leaders are at a huge disadvantage. Basically, if you are in power right now, or if you've been in power for the last 2 to 4 years, you're going to have a hard time getting reelected right now. That's just across the board, across various nations. And so there's that was going against Biden Harris is just, yeah, the feeling. And some of this is inflation, right? We kind of had a pandemic. We threw a bunch of money at it, and people were more willing to be sympathetic for governments to not respond very well, but they responded. But then all of a sudden inflation just keeps getting worse and worse. So there's that. I've also heard the take of, and I've heard this like on MSNBC, like left-leaning news outlets, not just left-leaning, like they're kind of like comfortably fallen over to the left.
Right, yeah.
Not just leaning in that direction. And they had someone on, Joe Scarborough, which is an interesting individual in the first place, because he once said that he went to Tim Keller's church. I remember him interviewing Tim Keller.
I remember this.
MSNBC.
Yeah, I remember that.
So him stating on that news outlet that, hey, this happened because, what was his reason? Because the left has become all about this identity politics, transgender stuff. He's like, 85% of people do not want grown men past puberty transitioning to women and then competing against girls. Like this is the left, or the Democratic Party has moved so left as to really ostracize the rest of the country. And he's like, it doesn't make sense. He says his daughter, who goes to a state university, can't even disagree with any of this ideology stuff because she'll get canceled immediately by the afternoon on social media. It was very interesting to hear him and kind of the unease in the chairs of people listening to him. And some people are like, are we at peak woke now? Are we beyond peak woke? Is it going to, and woke, I've said this before, that I don't love that term because it means different things to different people. So it tends to be an unhelpful category. But I do think those two factors, incumbent leaders have a hard time right now because of inflation, just generally, as well as, when it comes to some of this ideology stuff and some of the, like we've talked about on the podcast before, this is a technological issue. Transgender is technologically mediated. It's a view of your body. Christians do need to think about this stuff. We're not telling you on this podcast who you ought to vote for and saying all Christians should do this or that, because these are policy issues where there's lots of different ways to land in terms of your conscience. Lots of prefacing we can do, but we just want to model here how to think about this in different ways. And I don't think me, Joel, and Austin are completely. Austin, it sounded like you were gonna like lean to voting for Biden for a second ago for certain reasons, and I'm like, I would never do that. You know,
sure.
And maybe there's an argument to be made that if it was close in Texas, wouldn't you have been like under, like, you know that you're in Texas, it's gonna go red, but maybe you would vote Trump just for the sake of certain things. You know, it's kind of interesting to get into the particulars, but people are going to vote on this differently.
Like, yeah, one of the beliefs I'm very strong about when it comes to voting is that a vote does not signal a wholesale endorsement or approval of every single thing a candidate or a party may say or do. And I hold that for everybody, for Trump voters, for Democrats. I voted for American Solidarity Party. There are things about their platform I don't like. There are things about their platform I strongly disagree with. A vote does not signal a wholesale blank check endorsement of everything that a candidate says and does, and to impute that onto people is not only just kind of silly and short-sighted, but just tremendously unloving, because you wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that yourself. But it wouldn't have mattered who I voted for. I think Matt Martin's piece in Mere Orthodoxy on Monday, talking about his vote for American Solidarity Party, made the phenomenal point that any vote that is not going for the candidate that's going to carry a county is automatically a wasted vote. And in my county goes 70-80% Trump automatically. So it doesn't matter who I vote for. If I'm not voting for Trump, I'm wasting my vote, so to speak. And so when it comes to like the reasons why people vote, like, yeah, I disagreed with David French deciding that he was going to vote for Harris as a choice, but he had some very well thought out reasons for it, and he was very clear about the things he was like, I don't like these parts of Harris's campaign, but these are the reasons why. And that's where when it comes to conversations about this, especially in the social media space, where it's just like nobody can be reduced to the sum of an identity politic. Like those are all abstractions. They don't exist in the real world.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, was this the social? Go ahead, Joel.
No, you're gonna say, was this the
social media election, or was that 2016? Like, it was interesting seeing people show their surprise. And then people kind of saying, like, there was a popular post on Reddit where it's like, wait a second, is Reddit a bubble? Like, are we? Right. Yes, yeah. It is. Like
the number of posts on Threads of people who are just like extremely shocked to wake up in a social media. I've seen hundreds of them at this point. It's insane. I'm just like, yeah, all of us are in some bubble somewhere.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
that's
I think
it's impossible not just to not the other side.
No, I think it's really important. I think, like you said, Threads, probably left-leaning bubble, Reddit, left-leaning bubble. The only right-leaning social media bubble I know is X.
Yes.
If it is really right-leaning. So I do think Elon Musk, coming back to like the tech implications, Elon Musk buying that platform, which was a very left-leaning platform, really had a significant effect on like creating a space for people who hold dissenting views, like you mentioned, that would be canceled in other places, to find their people that they could be like, hey, I'm not alone, right? Like getting that echo chamber and be like, okay, I'm reaffirmed in this perspective, right? So it would be hard to say that it had no effect, it had huge effect, I believe.
No, technology sometimes is upstream from culture. Like, technology ends up shaping the way we think about the world, and then all of a sudden culture stems out of that. And I think, yeah, you make a really good point with Twitter. The influence of Twitter on this election is not marginal.
It's not marginal at all. And I wouldn't say this is the social media election. I would say this is the social media election in that uh, social media is no longer the best indicator of what's actually happening in the real world.
Right.
Like if there were any
Right.
proof that social media is not an accurate representation of real life, it was this election.
Yeah. I think this election is the podcast election. This is the election.
Yes, absolutely.
That has proved that people seek out podcasts. They want long form content. I think it's whiplash. I think it's like we're sick of, like, if you watch the news, like, it is crazy how everything is short sound bites. Like Neil Postman, he was the first to kind of document this shift towards entertainment in television. And so you really do have a different form, a different medium that allows for just genuine interaction. It's not scripted. Yeah, there might be talking points, there might be things like that, but I do think podcasts are the future. I think Christian leaders, like if you're a pastor listening to this, you need to think about podcasting. Like setting up a podcast as a way to talk about issues you can't get to on a Sunday morning sermon, as a way to help disciple your people. Now, it's not the only way, but this is, people are longing for thoughtful, informed, back and forth that isn't scripted or geared towards entertainment. They're also longing for friendship, and podcast can kind of fulfill that itch in a bad way. But podcasts do have a place, and yeah, with the millions and millions of viewers on Joe Rogan's and the other pods that Trump went on, I think it's a testament toward that.
Yeah, completely agree. I think the ability to see, like let's say legacy media say, oh, he's such a bad person, and then to hear from him for 3 hours and be like, okay, he did a 3 hour podcast and then he just went for a rally and he's still going, and I heard him talk the whole time, allows that voter to make a different opinion that is more direct to the candidate, to be like, okay, I heard him respond off the cuff. Like 3 hours, you can't script that, like even like smaller interviews and stuff, you can definitely script the back and forth, but like 3 hours is like, okay, we're really getting to the crazy parts of what this guy might say. And I think that made it more acceptable to be like, okay, yeah, he's not that bad.
Well, and then Harris never offered an alternative for people to compare, because this is a well-known fact about her all the time she's been, not even just in office, but just a politician, is that she's a terrible public speaker. She's a horrible public speaker. Like, she can't do this kind of stuff. So at no point was she ever able to steal that playbook that Trump was running and was very easy to copy and run with, and give people something else to consider. Like, it was a brilliant strategic move on the Trump campaign's part to kind of go for something that she couldn't do and reach as many people as possible through it. It was very effective.
Yeah, so I feel like, podcasts, social media, the other side of technology that really impacted the election is the embrace of new technology, right? So you have, like, let's say Bitcoin is an easy one, and AI, and like even other like the whole like startup ecosystem. So for Bitcoin, just reached an all-time high. They're like, hey, we're gonna get rid of Gary Gensler from the SEC, who's really been tough on Bitcoin and innovating that space. So that is just ripping, and people who are developing technology on Bitcoin are like, okay, now we are going to be more accepted. Or even like companies like Coinbase, who is like a crypto platform. It's like, okay, they're going to not have all the scrutiny to be regulated. And like, I think that is a canary in the coal mine of regulation across the board, right? Regulation with mergers, regulation in AI. It just allows people to feel more comfortable to be like, okay, the government's not going to come in, meddle with me dedicating 2 years of my life into something crazy where I might just like lose it because I go into, being overregulated.
Sure.
Yeah. And the explicit tie between Trump and Musk is going to be interesting as well. Like, is Elon Musk going to become part of some efficiency committee?
The DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. Yeah.
It's
It-
it's a weird
He's
world when you have a government department created that's like named after a meme. Like what has become
Memetic
of the world?
culture. Yeah.
Well, it's internet culture is the culture. I mean, that's what we
internet.
Yeah.
said two
Yeah,
podcasts ago, right?
internet of the culture is the culture, but Musk will have a whole new world to navigate when it comes to what he can and can't do if he is brought on the Trump administration in some way. Uh, the government's not a business that you can just come in and just not. It's not a private business that you can just come in and just make whatever changes you want. Like there are laws and procedures, and they can be very inefficient and slow, and that's just not kind of how he works. And so, uh, and I also do wonder. Just I think the Doge thing was the Trump campaign's internet culture parallel to what the Harris social media team was doing with all the brat stuff. The
Right.
Harris social team was really leaning into this like brat vibe for their content, and I think the Doge was the Trump team,
Equivalent.
the Trump equivalent. It's not. There's nothing of substance there. Like there's nothing concrete there from a policy standpoint. It's all just a vibe.
I might slightly disagree. So I think in like some of the spaces that I'm tracking with like VCs, who are like, say friends of Elon Musk, and see him come in to Twitter and like lay off these people, and then all these other CEOs being like, he laid off 70% of the workforce, and it's actually still going. So there
Hmm.
is probably more bloat. Um, it's not necessarily he did the right thing, and like you said, it's not like a company where he can come in and just like rip apart the whole government. But I do think he represents the desire to like turn over the stones that
Sure.
and like try to untie these knots. So I think like in the sense of like there is definitely a little bit of substance of like, hey, we are going to try probably to say, I mean, even to make it like personally, why he would be personally incentivized. He was telling stories about, hey, we're like trying to launch a rocket, but so and so organization is saying
Yeah.
that like, hey, the noise is going to affect the seals, or like,
Yes.
hey,
Yes.
you're affecting the shoreline, and we're the shoreline government. So like all of those areas of the government, he's gonna say, look, like there hasn't really been an incentive to really question the mandate and if these certain
Hmm.
agencies are going beyond their mandate, and then to like, and I think that actually happened in Argentina. There's a lot of parallels with Milei in Argentina going and be like, we are ripping apart all of these government offices because we're just like excessively spending, right? Which
Yeah.
comes back to the inflation topic. So I think there is definitely, while there is a whole meme culture to it, I do think there is like some real intent behind it.
I don't doubt I don't doubt there's intent behind it, and I don't doubt that once he if he were to get properly trained on how to be in government, because that's just, I mean, he works with government on the business side of things, but going in
Mm-hmm.
house, working on the in house side of government, that he might be able to make some serious improvements. I just don't know if it's going to go as smoothly as he would like it to. But I think the thing that gives me the most hesitancy is just like how much of Chesterton's fence are we going to respect here? Like, is there going to be a desire to understand why these things are here in the first place and whether they should maybe remain in the first place? Or are these going to be things that we just bulldoze through and ask questions
Yeah.
why later?
I think it's a really good question. And yeah, I should definitely say that I know I have bias, and maybe as a builder, I'm like, hey, like he's a very inspiring builder. So I do think like he will have that desire to be like, what is the root cause? So the reason I'm saying that is when he went to SpaceX, right? And you look at like a lot of the innovation they've been doing there, they do go to that whole first principles thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And from like a physicist, like even with like Tesla, all of these things, he always goes to first principles of like, hey, this rocket engine company said we'll sell you this part for like $10,000, and he's like, why? He'll question like, why is it $10,000? And then it's like, well, this part costs this much, and then he said, well, if we actually did everything in our house ourselves, we could make it for $100. And then
Mm-hmm.
he's like, okay, we're going to go do that, and they create this like vertically integrated supply chain and then have this massive cost advantages, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if he carries those principles with him, and I don't think he'll actually go officially into office. I think he'll just be advising,
Probably,
someone. Yeah.
probably.
I do think that he could probably apply, like, just question, be like, what is the original purpose for this? Are we trying to treat that purpose? Okay, I understand the original purpose, but these other things need to, like, go,
Sure.
Yeah.
And if he makes improvements in there, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, and that's what Chesterton's fence. I remember learning about that before, so I looked it up while you guys were talking, because that's the whole idea of, like, when you go up to a fence and it doesn't seem to serve a purpose, do you just immediately get rid of it, or do you first stop and ask why? Why is it there? And then that's wisdom, is first considering why it might be there in the first place, rather than just getting rid of it. So yeah, no, I think there's applications there, and it's interesting to think about the future of Elon Musk. One aspect of this conversation that I'm interested in discussing with you guys. So a lot has been made in the last maybe 2-3 weeks about young men getting red pilled, moving toward the Trump side. So you think about guys in their, teens to, mid to late 20s, early 30s, Austin, how old are you?
33.
Okay, yeah, I'm 35, Joel, you're in. So
35, yeah.
we're a little bit on the upper end of this, but, like, in our churches, we interact with these guys very often at technology events that I'm a part of. It's mostly young men. It's interesting, the overlap between the demographic of those who are working in tech, as well as the same demographic that's been talked about with this, the Democrats, they just, like, can't reach out to youth. They need to create their own Joe Rogan. And then I saw someone respond to that being like, well,
Yeah.
Joe Rogan was on the left like 8 years ago.
Yes.
He just keeps asking questions and doing his thing. I don't know very much about Joe Rogan, to be fair, but I really do think about, like, what's going on with young men and what vision do they have for, for their lives. So if you're a young white male and you've been told over and over in some of these left-leaning areas, and in Canada especially, where this is just in the public school system as well, oh, you're a white male, you need to decenter yourself and center other voices, and you don't actually have a sense of ambition. That Elon Musk, like, let's go fix things. Like, I don't care about my identity. I care about the problem and fixing it for the betterment of humanity. Like, Elon Musk just has that vibe of, like, let's just do what's best for humanity. The White Horse Inn actually did a good deconstruction, not isn't the best word, but they did a breakdown analysis of Elon Musk, analysis of his theology, kind of that imbibes a humanitarianism, and some good and bad in that. It was really good. We'll link to it in the show notes. But how do you guys think about young men in your church that are maybe getting red pilled and they're thinking about that? What vision do they have for their future? What are they living for? Is it just like, I worry that it's a whiplash from this, like, oh, you're part of the problem, inherent systematic racism, you're part of it, you're a racist, you need to, grieve over this, whatever ideology that is, to shift over to, like, Trump.
I think there's maybe 2 points that I'll mention. One is interesting to hear you say that and then realize it's true, because in tech, if you look at all the donations from Google, Microsoft, it's very left leaning. And that's, like, the older tech, if it is true that, like, now younger, tech males are shifting to the right. So that's an interesting, narrative to even think about happening, because I had thought, like, tech is going to stay left and that's just how it is, but it might not be, right? And I think, that whole process of people being like, these groups will stay in a certain box is probably, like, bad thinking. The second is, like, women actually voted surprisingly, like, I think it was like 46% of women voted for Trump. And that question was like, well, what happened? We saw these ads about, like, women or dads voting for their daughters, like, to support their daughters' reproductive rights. But I think what I saw this recently, someone said it actually turned out to be mothers looking at their sons, right? They're, like, sons who are increasingly ostracized and alone, and they're like, wow, I'm going to vote for my son. So I think that ties to this, like, narrative of like, this group that has been like probably pushed back. And again, like
Yeah.
I think parallels with a lot of groups, they feel like, okay, I'm now on the outside, and the inside is just like this niche group of people.
I as someone who did youth ministry from all of Trump's first term, all of this second, the like 90% of this Biden Harris administration. I mean, it's been just a very strange shift to watch, and I don't know what the answer is. I just know that there's a reason why men are fleeing the Democratic Party in droves. I mean, there was a chart that showed male affiliation among Democrats over the past 10 years. And you couldn't ask for a sharper decline if you wanted. I mean, people are flocking or fleeing this party for a reason. And yeah, when all that you hear, the only message that you hear is just how dangerous and terrible men are without qualification. Like, to be a male is to be a dangerous individual. Given the choice, spend the night between, with the man and the bear, women will take the bear. Just like there's something very unhealthy going on there. And what makes me sad is that can be true, and the response can also be just as dangerous. Like, I don't think that however poisonously dangerous the left is when it comes to a vision of healthy masculinity, I don't think the right's vision is without serious dangers of its own. I think there are dangers in the opposite ditch, and what we should be striving towards is a healthier point, not just the opposite point. The opposite is not automatically the most healthy direction to go in.
Yeah.
And that's,
I mean, there was go ahead.
We're so polite. Us Canadians, we just
Canadians.
No, you go first. Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting. Whereas Americans, they're just loud and we'll just keep talking. Sorry, Americans.
All our Americans drop off.
No, y'all. If y'all ever come down to the South, we will show y'all Southern hospitality, and y'all will mistake it for Canadian hospitality, I'm sure.
I've seen that. No, I think the whole centrist movement is interesting, right? Because I think there was like a period in time where there was like, okay, we need a central party, and like there was an independence push, and then the only thing that really came out of that was like RFK, right? Which is another interesting aspect where there's like I forgot what his name is. Like, I think the Democratic Party didn't endorse any of these people who are like formerly Democratic who wanted to be independent because they were seeing as splitting their vote, right? And that's another interesting aspect of the two-party American system, where in Canada we have many parties, many European countries, it's like many parties. So looking at, this two-party system in the States is like, oh wow, there's some new game theory mechanics that come out of that, right? Where it's like, you're gonna split our vote, we can't endorse you, and that actually like pushes you into the opponent's arms,
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, the decision for Harris to choose Tim Walz as her VP pick is probably one of the most like one of the worst choices she could have made. Like a pure identity politics vote. He's an older white dude with some of the most progressive policies a governor could have. It's like, it's the worst of both worlds. Like, you're actively offending the very people that you're hoping will come to you.
That's
because
true. Yeah.
Because like it's like, well, he's an older white guy, you're going to vote for an older white guy, right? And it's like, no, this guy is one of the most radically progressive governors in the entire country. Had she gone with someone that was more of a centrist pick, it could have been a very different story. But Walz was as soon as Walz got called, I have a Discord group chat with some of my gaming buddies, some of whom are very liberal, some of them are very conservative, and me being the guy that's like kind of in the average middle between them all. As soon as Walz was announced, I was like, that's probably it. Like, that would probably be a deal breaker for a lot of people, and it looks like it was.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of points in the election where they're like, oh, that was it. Like, like not doing the primary. But then I feel like some of that was like, oh, then we have to give away all the funding dollars that Biden had. So we have to like, money matters. But then you look at like how much Harris spent and how much Trump spent, and it's like, well, money doesn't maybe matter, right?
No, yeah.
Oh, the money matters. It's just it's crazy how much spending there is. Yeah, there's a recent article by Jake Meter. He talked about, there's three dominant theopolitical tribes within evangelicalism at the moment. He says, first, there's a firmly Trump-aligned evangelicals who are essentially the evangelical version of the Daily Wire. Second, there's the voraciously never Trump block of evangelicals, which is basically the evangelical version of the Bulwark. And I would say in Canada, there's a lot of never Trumpers. Like, there's a culture within a lot of churches where mentioning Trump is only as a butt to a joke. Like,
right. Yes.
I literally was in one of these churches for 9 years, and I remember making a joke that the butt of the joke was Trump, because I just knew it would vibe in that way, and I regret that.
Like never Trumpers have a problem, and I say that as somebody who is still technically a never Trumper. Like there's been so much.
I can respect the desire for character, and therefore they're saying never Trump out of a desire to always vote for leaders who have high character. Anyways, it's
but the way that has now been gone about. I mean, having done some work in some kind of never Trump leaning organizations, like, we now have our own problems. Like, this movement is old enough now that it has problems of its own that need to be taken seriously.
And I think that's what Jake Meter, there's like this never Trump, ambitiously never Trump, right?
Yeah.
And Meter says both these groups have the same problem. There isn't actually a need for an evangelical Daily Wire, because both the Daily Wire already exists, and because there's nothing added to the Daily Wire by supplementing it with evangelicalism. The same applies for the Bulwark, even if it's a slightly more complex thing. And then he says, this brings me to my third block of evangelicals, a group that voted in a broad variety of ways, but isn't particularly obsessed with politics because they're busy volunteering around the community, helping out in the nursery at their church, and taking care of their families. They're not interested in revolutionary political ideologies of any type, but neither are they triggered when a friend expresses a political opinion they disagree with. End quote. I am in that third group. I am excited for the local church. I'm excited to care for my family. I am serving in my school that my kids are a part of. And like, yeah, let's talk about Trump. Cool. There's some pros and cons. Hey, let's talk about Harris. Cool. There's pros and cons. I think I'd go one way more than the other, but I'm not going to freak out about this stuff. Like, the people who are crying post-election and like, woe is me and how do I lament? It's like, well, you just pray. Like, yeah, you might be sad, but like, wow, like, you can be sad, you can lament. It's not wrong to be sad after an election, but I do worry about, just the time we spend on the ground. Like, I want to encourage young men in particular to build things, build great technology, wherever, if you're at a tech company, build great families, serve the poor, serving your local church. Like, that's kind of the vision that I want to cast to young men in my life, and read good books and talk about those books with others. Like, just trying to do the basic things of growing in virtue that our society has largely forgotten.
Yeah, there's a desire, like, building for the sake of building is not automatically just a good thing. It matters what you're building and what it's for. And so we want to encourage men to be builders. We want to encourage men to grow things, but we want them to build and grow good things that point them to the end that God created them to be as men, and reflecting that.
Yeah. No, I think it's, I'm encouraged, like you said, that there are that third category. Like, the people I've actually talked to, I don't think is anyone I've talked to personally is like too captive to an ideology, right? They're like putting Christ as their like firm ideology, and then like on these, if you want to call them like secondary truths, are like making a decision, right? But I think when you let that overtake, like, hey, we're brothers and sisters in Christ, that's where the problems can arise, right? So
yeah. So how should Christians vote in Canada, Joel, next election? Pierre Poilievre, is he the future? I mean, it's inevitable.
So this is the interesting thing, actually, where we have a similar election vibe, right? Where like, at least what I'm seeing, the conservative vote is like polling really well. But the difference is, well, we'll see if Justin Trudeau steps down and there is a new person in there that actually becomes like some sort of opposition. But at the moment, it's like the liberals have even been like, yeah, like this is not going to happen. You know, like it isn't portrayed as neck and neck. It's portrayed as this is a landslide for the conservatives, and also nothing is going to happen right now until. But you know, Justin Trudeau could step down, and there could all of a sudden become, you know, a sprint for this new candidate that makes it
just
challenging
like
again.
Harris.
So is Justin Trudeau unpopular right now?
Very unpopular.
Yeah,
That's interesting because everything I thought about Justin Trudeau as an American was that like he was very beloved by Canadians. So that's interesting to me.
He was early on, like he got elected because he was kind of seen as this golden boy who hadn't done that much wrong other than, you know, color his face black and act like a black person. One Halloween party. Like everybody's seen that, but
there's also Indian ones, but go on.
Yeah, like he was the son, like that's not the most important thing about his policy. His policy was very left progressivist kind of stuff, and he's the son of one of the most progressive prime ministers in Canada's history. And so he just kind of had that, like Bill Clinton, or not Bill Clinton, George Bush, W. Bush, and his dad. Like there's a similar, like, wait, is this guy really that smart compared to his dad kind of thing? I think that people are reckoning with, like the same way that George W. Bush was the butt of every joke for a time in the States. Now
I don't know. I think the outlook on W has like really improved, even among like among his critics.
Totally, now it has.
Because of Trump. Yes, in the Obama years, yes, W was the butt of every joke. Now I think that's the "miss me yet" meme that is the assessment of W.
But yeah, no. Trudeau is he's just increased inflation a ton. He's increased the immigration, like just in radical ways.
Same issues. Immigration, except it's not a border wall. It's literally just like open visas. Acceptance. Yeah.
The college in our town, Conestoga College, they like doubled in size in just a couple years by just having so many students come from overseas. And then they all looked for jobs, but housing didn't grow. So our housing prices are wild compared to the States.
Oh,
I can imagine. Think your housing is bad in the States? Man, come to Canada. It's brutal. A pastor recently tweeted that like this is why you should never, as a church, send your seminary students and aspiring pastors to the States, because they're going to live there and realize how good they have it and never come back to Canada. This is a real issue. Like I'm concerned about Canada's theology. It's one of the reasons why I'm doing a PhD and trying to become a theologian that's Canadian, is for the sake of our country, because so many good profs end up going to the States because they can get paid way more and live more comfortably. And like one of the things that's kind of nice about the States being so close, I wish this was true, but I always kind of feel this. I'm like, do you really think that half of the population of the States, or like however many voted for Trump, do you actually think they're all crazy? Because that's the vibe in most of Canada. It's like, do you really believe this? Like, just go meet Austin and his family and friends and people that live in Texas. They are normal human beings. And there's so many people in Canada. Like one of Trudeau's biggest things that he tries to do is attach the conservatives in Canada to Trump. Because that will,
oh my gosh,
that is literally the thing. Because we're just so left leaning in Canada. Yeah.
It's a traditional liberal playbook is to like always pick the Conservative Party as the American party, and then Canadians inherently are like, well, we're not American, we're different. So that will like push people towards being like, well, if we're not American, we have to vote for the different party.
I would nuance your comment, Andrew, some that like, yes, are there crazy Trump supporters where I live in the Texas Panhandle? Yes, there are. I have seen firsthand what destruction some of them have brought to people I love. But they are overwhelmingly, I can count them on two hands, maybe a third if I had a third hand. The vast majority of them are just normal people just trying to get by. And if you don't think that the left doesn't have its own version of equally unhealthy crazies,
Totally.
you're just deceived. That is just not, like, craziness is not a unique property to conservatives.
Totally.
Yeah, so I think we have, and in crime as well is another big issue here. Like crime, everyone feels is going up. The people like getting their cars stolen and shipped, overseas. And it's like the government or police being like, put your keys by the door so they can steal it easier, and they
which is
harm
just
you
like
when you break in.
A full failure of nerve right there, like a complete just like nerve is gone at that point.
Yeah, so I think those same issues are going to play out, but the only difference is we're going to be a year later, right? So it's next October. So the question is, what will change in a year? And especially with, Trump now in office, how will that affect the relationship between the two countries as well? And we don't have as big a tech scene.
Yeah, I mean, would Trump inadvertently give support to Trudeau? Like if Trump comes in and if he doesn't try to be a moderate, a moderate wise governor in any sense, does that give ammunition to Trudeau to continue painting? He's like, I was right. I was right. Look at how crazy this is.
Yeah. Do you want that? And then he'll paint that picture for sure.
Yeah, that would be the best thing for Trudeau. Would be like the January 6th thing is what always gets referenced in any ideology. There's always these key stories that paint the visual picture in people's mind for what they represent. And so Trump is against democracy. Look what happened January 6th. And I think that is, Trump needs to do something like that again in order to create this kind of moment. But we'll see. Mm-hmm. We won't be able to predict the future, but we will be able to talk about it when it comes. So thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you to our Patreons for supporting us. And things are bumping right now. Bumping, is that what the cool kids say in our Discord? It's kind of cool to
I believe it's
a bunch of people have
lit.
joined. It's lit. Things are lit. Yeah.
Yeah, who says bumping, Andrew?
But not gaslit. I don't know. I'm not gonna try to use cool slang, okay? I'm just gonna use whatever comes to mind. And yeah, it's fun to kind of interact with some of our listeners on that forum. So feel free to join, and thank you for listening. Use tech, find rest, glorify God. Take care, everybody.
See ya.
Y'all have a good one.